couldn't shake the feeling that danger was dogging my trail, and maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as immortal as I thought. Being 18 doesn't make a man bulletproof, and looking back, I realize them's words of wisdom. The rain had started that morning just after sunup, driven by a gusting south wind that hammered cold drops against my slicker and drummed on my hat. I was riding through the Gypsum Hills country west of the Red Bed Plains, a series of rolling hills and buttes, red mesas some 150 to 200 feet high, all cut through by narrow gullies. The hills are capped by 15 to 20-foot layers of gypsum that sparkle in the sun, the reason the Indians called them the Glass Hills. Here and there grew stands of red cedar, blackjack, and post oak, some of them lightning blasted and dead, and under my horse's feet, primroses, black-eyed Susans, and tiny violets peeped out from among the gramma grass. I kept turning my head, checking behind me, and saw nothing but the rain-lashed landscape, iron-gray clouds so low I reckoned I could reach up and grab a handful, and I figured it would be like clutching at wood smoke. I rode on, heading due south. 100 or so miles to my west lay the majestic Black Mesa, and directly in front of me, but still a long ways off, rose the weathered crags of the Wichita and Arbuckle Mountains. It was getting close to noon, and I was becoming needful of coffee and a smoke. I'd tried to roll a cigarette earlier, but the rain had battered tobacco and paper from my fingers, scattering brown shreds over the front of my slicker. I'd given vent to a few choice cuss words, I can tell you, even though I knew if Sally heard me, she'd be real annoyed. That little gal was dead set against cussing, and she'd made that plain to me a time or two. Reining in the paint, I glanced around, looking for a likely spot to hole up for an hour. If the riders behind me were honest men, they'd likely be sheltering from the downpour, and outlaws don't much care for getting wet either, come to that. It seemed to me I could stop and brew up some coffee and then be on my way again, and nobody'd be the wiser. Like I said, that's how it seemed to me, but as things turned out, I was about to lead my ducks to the wrong pond. About 100 yards ahead of where I sat my horse, the gypsum crowning one of the hills slanted sharply downward to about 30 feet above the level. A narrow creek ran along the bottom of the hill under the gypsum shelf, and the slope had been undercut, eroded away by wind and floodwaters, forming a natural shallow cave about 10 feet deep, twice that much high, and maybe 40 or 50 feet long. A few stunted juniper grew higher up the hillside where there might be fallen branches, at least enough to boil up some coffee. I kneed the paint forward and rode up to the cave. Now I was closer. It was pretty much as I've described, and I saw traces of previous fires built small the way Indians do. A goodly supply of dry wood, mostly pine and hickory branches, was scattered around, and I was glad I didn't have to depend on the wet, slow-burning juniper. I swung out of the saddle, eased the girth on the paint, and led him to a patch of good grass close enough to the overhang that he'd be out of the worst of the rain. The saddlebags I took with me back to the cave. When a man you regard as a friend, as well as a boss, gives that much money into your trust, you take care of it real well. That was what I thought anyway, and I believe I had the right of it. I started a fire, and when it was burning good, I went to the creek and filled the coffee pot. Then I fetched Sally's bonnet and my sack of supplies back to the cave and laid them in a dry spot. That done, I threw a handful of coffee into the pot and set the pot on the coals to boil. I shrugged out of my wet slicker and laid it on the ground, then adjusted the cartridge belt and holster around my hips. The faded blue shirt I wore was damp at the collar, and from the knees down, my brown canvas pants were soaked. I was an inch above middle height that year, skinny as the shadow of a barbed wire fence. But most of the beef I did have was in my arms and shoulders, so when I had a mind to push or pull something, it usually moved. My hair was auburn, tinting red in places, and my eyes were gray. Bob Collins told me one time that when I was riled, my eyes shaded to the coldest gray he'd ever seen in all his born days. Well, I didn't get riled often. If folks let me be, then I did the same for them.